In the previous episode, I had to stop where I was talking about different ethnicities of African people, and within the early pre-dynastic era of ancient Egypt. If you watched it, if you have not seen that episode, you want to go see it to be able to actually comprehend this one, because they flow back to back. And I talked about the Monotapa kingdom, yes, yeah, and I talked about the Soweto people, the Bantus, and the Khoikhoi. And then I talked about the great Zimbabwean kingdom, dating as far back as 200,000 BCE. Okay, now let's move on. Let us not forget that Egypt is in Africa, not the Middle East. And the Egyptian kingdom did not start in the northeastern regions of Africa as thought today, but to inner Africa, and subconsciously acknowledge other civilizations existing simultaneously. The ancient Egyptians traced their lineage to early rulers as O'Hara, who was known to have lost his life while hunting hippopotamus for food. When he was unfortunately seized by the jaws of a hippo he was hunting and drowned. It's a very, very famous, a very, very popular story. Look for the story of O'Hara. O'Hara. Then there were early rulers like Djoser, and I know you're going to know this, Imhotep. I'm talking about Imhotep, who revolutionized architecture. And we had Numer. Even at that, the Egyptians, the ancients, the early Egyptians, were still not sure about their beginning. We need to get this right in history, okay? That's why before biblical writings in the papyrus scrolls I talked about in the previous episode, and as mentioned by Dr. Joseph Ben Yochanan in his books, get his books, get books by Dr. Joseph Ben Yochanan, okay? You can see some of his books there. Okay. Dr. Joseph Ben Yochanan wrote that the ancient Egyptians actually wrote these words in the scrolls about where they came from, but they were not really sure. But what they wrote down, we came from the beginning of the Nile, at the foothill of the mountain of the moon, where Hapi, our God, resides. Now, that tells us without a shadow of doubt that the great Egyptian civilization started from modern-day Uganda. Modern-day Uganda, okay, pay attention. I'm talking about where the White Nile Nyanja Nwanze, the way that Dr. Ben actually wrote it in his book, the native name, Nyanja Nwanze, okay, known as Lake Victoria today, okay. In Uganda, when you look at when you study history and you look at the map, you can see that the White Nile, okay, begins its journey meeting with the Blue Nile in Khartoum. Now, Khartoum, Khartoum, Khartoum. That is in Sudan. That is where the Blue Nile and the White Nile, okay, meet. Now, I told you you're going to have to turn the world map upside down because the Nile starts flowing from Uganda, okay, with, flowing down towards Egypt. So they meet in Khartoum in Sudan, and then they run through the midland, fanning away through Egypt's delta into the Mediterranean Sea. Can you see that now? So the Nile did not start from Egypt running down to Uganda, but from Uganda, so from the north heading south. So now south is going to be north, north is going to be south now. That's going to be the correct order. Sorry, I forgot to say something. The Blue Nile actually, the Blue Nile actually started in Ethiopia. Now, okay, back to history. Okay, now let's check out, in your own time, check out nations by settlement in the Bible. Okay, when you have the time, read through the book of Genesis 10. It's a very long read, so we don't have enough time to do that. So, but it helps in tracing and breaking down the lineage of nations and cultures. That is, if you read it through the scope of history, not religion. Now, in there we look at the descendants of Noah's sons as uniformly stated and agreed upon by the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. Let's see. Okay, now let's talk about that. Okay, now Japheth has no connection in Africa, the way we look at it. The other two were African ancestors, Ham and Shem. Okay, here is the way it goes. Ham, for the non-circumcised Africans, an upholder of the Arabian culture. Shemites are those of us who still uphold circumcisions of our kids on the 8th birthday, okay, but and subconsciously follow that spiritual tradition of monotheism, but then it's actually fading away. You see that among the Igbos in Nigeria, the Yorubas area, within the south of the Benue and Niger rivers. You see that among the Cameroonians. and the Ghanaians all the way through Kenya and some certain parts of Southern Africa. And it is subconsciously practiced among the African Americans too. Where am I going with this? The same thing within different parts of the world by a certain group of people, a certain ethnicity, but they just cannot connect the dots. History. Now, here is what I've been trying to say. Our ancestors were the one that stayed in the Holy Land that you call Palestine today, or Israel. They stayed put until they were once abducted and massed out of Canaan. That was our original ancestral land as documented in history by the 5th century BCE, okay? And they were taken into captivity first by the Assyrians. You know what? Let's look into the Bible and let's look at 2 Kings again. Now, let's look at 2 Kings 17. 2 Kings 17, okay? And I'm going to read from the 22nd verse. And it reads, "The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned through all his servants, the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile in Assyria, and they are still there." It doesn't end there, because they suffered another round of slavery by the Babylonians. Right after that, let's look at 1 Chronicles 9, just the very first verse. 1 Chronicles. "So all Israel were reckoned by genealogies, and behold, they were written in the book of the kings of Israel. And Judea was who were carried away to Babylon for their transgression. Now the first inhabitants who dwelt in the possessions in the city were the Israelites, the priest, Levi, and the Nethinim." You see, the first was by the Assyrians. The second time was by the Babylonians, enslaving us throughout Mesopotamia for another 70 years before finally driving our ancestors out after the first resettlement in the year 70 CE. Now, when I talk about the people that lived within these areas, you can now begin to see how our ancestors were pushed all the way, okay, down towards Egypt, all the way down, and see how we have lost all those territories within northern Africa today, all the way through the old Carthage, Morocco, all the way to Libya, all the way then to the east, Egypt. We got pushed and pushed and pushed all the way. Now, like I said to you, don't look at the Suez Canal. All these areas were connected before. You could just walk through, ruled by one pharaoh. Pushed all the way down to sub-Saharan Africa. But, okay, nobody ever talks about this. Even to the point when the Roman Flavian came over and destroyed Jerusalem and took hundreds of thousands of our unfortunate brothers and sisters into another round of slavery, this time in the Roman Empire. Okay? While that was happening in Rome, with black slaves in Rome, who, I mean, well, nobody, well, I'm going to explain that, how they were able to actually assimilate into the race. Okay, I'm going to go into all that. But while they were already in Rome, I'm not going to tell you the history of the first escapees of Assyrian tragedy. These were our ancestors that found a presumably safe hideout by the south of the Niger River. That was how they fled to inner Africa. You know one thing? To make this a little bit clearer for you, I like us to, let's go into the Apocrypha. We're going to look at some books that were taken out of the Bible. Let's look at the book of 2nd Esdras. I'm going to have to use my Apocrypha this time around. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to have to use my my Kindle. Let me use my young Kindle file. Okay, now let's go to the book of 2nd Esdras. Yeah, got my Apocrypha up here. Now this is what the Apocrypha looks like. I don't know if you can see it. This is the Apocrypha actually, and that's what I'm gonna be reading. So now, yeah, 2nd Esdras 13, and from the 39th verse, we're gonna read all the way to 49. These are the 10 tribes which were led away from their own land into captivity in the days of King Hosea, whom Shalmaneser, the king of the Assyrians, led captive. He took them across the river, and they were taken into another land. But they formed this plan for themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the nations and go to a more distant region, where mankind had never lived, that there at least they might keep their statutes, which they had not kept in their own land. And they went in by the narrow passages of the Euphrates River. For at that time the Most High performed signs for them, and stopped the channels of the river until they had passed over. Through that region there was a long way to go, a journey of a year and a half, and that country is called Azerit. That was how they ended up in sub-Saharan Africa. These were slaves that were able to escape from Assyria. They crossed the Euphrates, they escaped, and it took them 1.5 years. Can anybody connect the dots here? 1.5 years all the way. I'm going to tell you more about that, the reason why they ended up at the first place of settlement below the Niger River, because there were other settlements. They were in Egypt. The Arabians were ready, okay, all over the place, grabbing them, because you could easily identify a black person, get them back to the Romans. Egypt was not safe. They had to go all the way down to Axum. It still wasn't safe. The Arabians were still capturing them and giving them back to the Romans. And all the way to a land where nobody had dwelt before. Sub-Saharan Africa. And they had to live like animals in those jungles for a long, 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 long time. And I'm going to prove, you see, gradually, you watch this video over and over and over, do your own research, and you will get to understand. They started a new life around the sub-Saharan Africa. Yet, they were interrupted again just after 1500 to 1600 years. Because you see, we have read that they were not keeping the statues, they were far away from their gods or whatever, and they kept on getting punished and whatever. But guess what? A bigger punishment this time, where they inevitably were met with a prophecy. With a prophecy in the book of Deuteronomy. And they got that punitive, they were actually, you know, and that punitive measures was taken against them in full chains by the 1600 CE. What are we talking about here now? We're talking about our brothers and sisters that were sailed by by the captors across the seas to the foreign lands. Am I making sense now? Are we getting there? Where they were now sold for rock bottom prices into a different kind of brutal slavery. Not the easy one in Assyria, not the easy one in Babylon, but I'm talking about a brutal slavery this time around, a bigger one in the 1600s. You still don't know who I'm talking about yet? Let's look at the book of Deuteronomy 28:64. Let's read the scriptures, okay? And then we can connect the dots so you can know who I am talking about today. The true identity of the people of the Holy Land getting revealed in detail right now. Deuteronomy 28:64. Then the Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship all the gods of wood and stones. The cross, does that say anything? Which neither you nor your fathers have known. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting. Sounds like all the police harassment. No resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, no hope, and a despairing heart. You will live in constant suspense, filled with dread both night and day, never sure of your life. In the morning you will say, if only it were evening. And in the evening, if only it were morning. Because of the terror that you will fill your heart and the sight that your eyes will see. The Lord will send you back in ships on a journey, okay? I promised you will never make again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and females, slaves. Now, let that marinate in your mind for a while. Then let's now go back and read the same Deuteronomy 28, but the 15th verse now. Let's go to the 15th verse. Now, Deuteronomy 28:15. That is where it says curses for disobedience. 15th verse. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am given to you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. You see, everything I just talked about here applies to our fellow brothers and sisters, the African Americans, and those who have actually been able to make their way back. But you see, sometimes I wonder, I have read a lot of books, and I have read books about Michael Nostradamus, known as Nostradamus. And sometimes I wonder if I should just call what I've just read from the Bible here, if I should look at it spiritually and say it is about a force that had to manifest from a spiritual curse, or should I just call it not a prophecy but a plan? I'm trying to think like a historian here now. Well, I have a speech coming up in Ghana and in Nigeria, and I'll clarify that. You see, in an article, in a blog that I wrote that got published on the website of my mentor, Dr. Pastor Sunday Delaja, well known as DSA, I added this crucial facts about the Jews of the Caucasian ethnicity as well, that cannot be refuted, because don't start bashing me here. I'm trying to clarify something here, and that is about the confusion about the Jews returning to the Holy Land to go, are they joining or are they fake? And this is what I wrote. I have it here. In that article, in this article, this is what I wrote, okay, about the returning Jews to the Holy Land. I'm actually trying. I'm not saying that every one of them can actually claim, an ancestral right to our ancestors. That's what I'm saying. But I'm talking about those who have assimilated into the race, that now look different, actually calling for the word of the former president of Egypt. But let me clarify this now. This is what I wrote in that article. Our brothers and sisters who were taken from our original homelands earlier, although maintaining their ancestral history, had assimilated into the other side race and no longer resemble us, recognize us, the children of their fathers and mothers, or even remembered their ancestors who looked exactly like us. They had either forgotten or deliberately, out of shame and fright, denied their true identity due to the unfortunate conditions, even though they never forgot the homeland and were still associated with it until today. Now, over the centuries, they washed off the melanin, the ultraviolet radiation of the land's environment climate gave them. They washed every last part of the skin physically and their minds somehow deliberately. But we still love them and call them blessed, as we are. They have paved the way by returning to the original homeland, and we support them and will now replicate their bold, courageous moves in building a new Jerusalem in the other land discovered in our Cable Land by our fleeing ancestors. Brothers and sisters, to fully comprehend what I meant while describing the actions of the true European and American Jews by bloodline, not the Khazarians, not the Ashkenazis, okay? I mean, today's European Jews who are now of different skin colors due to rapid assimilation by desire. For you to really comprehend this, I will recommend a book titled, I have this book. I read it. Fantastic book. This book is titled White Like Horror, and the author is actually Gail Lukasik. Okay, get this book and read it. It will help you. It will actually help you comprehend what I just talked about here. The book will help you understand the deep need for someone to to intentionally, out of shame and fright, deny their own background of ancestral identity due to the unfortunate conditions that we are still subjected to today. It's like a Negro alive when the Jim Crow kind of law is still active, where segregation is still at its finest, legally. was what was going on within the Roman Empire then. It was not a good time, not a good place to be known openly as a descendant of a black Hebrew slave when you have mixed in fully through like over 3 generations and no longer look anything close to your mixed race great-grandfather or great-grandmother, or like your main ancestors who were really black. You are now white like the Romans. You want to blend in. You don't want to suffer what your ancestors suffered. You still know. It's still fresh in your mind. That was what was going on back then. Because see, today in America, I once saw this blonde girl, you know, and we were talking. I said, I'm from Nigeria. She goes like, really? My great-great-grandfather was from Nigeria. I was like, what? She got silky hair, you were blonde. But she was telling me the truth. When you keep breathing that way, I mean, yeah, you can change. I have seen a lot of black people with ancestors that were actually white people, and I have seen a lot of white people, real white, you know, but when you look through their family history, they've got a great-great-great-great-grandfather who was a descendant of slaves or from Africa or whatever. But because they kept on breeding the other way, so then because, you know, you now have a mixed race child and then goes with another white person, the child can never, I mean, the child, I mean, loses more melanin, and then they keep going that way until the skin color washes off. So there's a possibility that some of those European Jews actually, yes, were actually one of us, but the thing is, like, they don't want to identify with us, and that is where the problem is. Let's get back to the, I mean, you see, let's get back to the history lecture, you know. This is not a religious argument, you know, but revelation of facts about the particular people the Bible is truly talking about when we consult historic writings and archaeological evidences. An extraordinary look into a real proven history, considering just facts. I mean facts without doubt on what actually transpired, how, where, and why, as truly referenced by various civilizations. Historic facts show that modern day Israel was once, like I said before, okay, the geographical and political territory of Kemoth. I said this in the previous episode. If you believe that you have claim to the Holy Land, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, then your ancestors got to be a person of the ethnicity that fits the land due to the environmental climate. Proven historic fact. Try to look for Maccabees, read chapter 8. You can see all that. We're running out of time. That's why I'm in a hurry, okay? All events occurred when both lands were still inhabited by our ancestors. Then until the Romans' invasion I mentioned earlier, which caused the fleeing of the black Jews to Africa, just as Yeshua predicted in the book of Luke 21:21. Yeah, just Luke 21:21. Very easy to remember, you know. I have talked a lot from the Bible now, but now let's look into books written by experts. from Babylon to Timbuktu. Okay? If you read this book, it's actually written by Dr. Rudolph Windsor. I love this book. Page 84 reads, in the year 65 BCE, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During this period, from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. 1 million Jews. 1 million black Jews. Are we getting it now? From Judea fled into Africa, as stated in this book here. Now, coupled with details of the 10 tribes mentioned earlier, the ones that said escaped from Assyria, and then Babylon to West Africa, below the Niger and Benue River, it means that millions of the original Israelis are living in West, East, and Southern Africa today. What more can I say to clear my point? We can spot them in south of the Niger River, along the west of Nigeria, the Yorubas, and east of Nigeria, the Igbos, and the descendant relatives, the Igalas. That's the tribe I come from. I'm from the Igala tribe, okay? And they have more of them, and you have more of them discovered in a place called Kumba in Cameroon and other regions. You have a lot of them in Ghana, Togo. Then you have you have some in Sudan, and you have them in Kenya, and then you have them in a particular place in South Africa as well. Brothers and sisters, sorry, it has happened again. You know what? For the sake of time, I will stop here for now until another time. However, I would like to close this episode with a few words. It's time for us to put things back the way they were. The wrong has got to be written right. You see, because men have reinterpreted the scripture in a manner to suit their own desires, with streams of expressive styles about the requirement for inequality. To them, that is the correct way to rule the world. One color of people should be over all other humans of other colors, and then only the educated ones must always come first and rule the uneducated ones. How about wisdom? And above all, the most annoying part, a woman has been placed beneath her husband or the man, according to the Bible and the Quran and the Torah. Well, all that is finally losing its place in today's world. You see, because in this era of true knowledge and a future that's going to generate global awakening, all will know that in the beginning, before it all changed, human beings had earlier implanted the concept of God the Mother, not God the Father as we believe today. I know I am hurting feelings here, but come on, let's be honest. The truth here. Because that was how it was in the text. Okay? That will later be drawn via inspiration for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These three monotheistic religions. But if we have got to look into scientific reality, the man comes out of a woman. That is why it says God made a woman in her own image, and out of the woman came forth her helpmate, a man. Credible biological reality of human reproductive circle. I'll see you next Sunday. Shalom.